I think ever since Lies of P was announced, I've always thought it looked cool. And this might be because I've always loved the idea of inanimate objects coming to life. So when I saw that the main antagonistic force in the story would be puppets, I was sold. But I was also one of those people who at first dismissed the game as being just a Bloodborne copy. After all, who could deny the similarities between the two games? Throw in a little bit of fatigue from Soulslike games and I just decided to skip the game entirely on release. And man, let me tell you, I was very wrong for doing that. This is because back then I failed to realize that Lies of P in one aspect of its story is very similar to my favorite video game series. The same way that Santa Monica is able to take mythological stories and reshape them to tell new ones for the God of War series, Lies of P does the same thing with fairy tales we grew up reading. I was a huge fan of Disney's Pinocchio when I was a kid. I owned the VHS and would watch the movie regularly with my parents. There was just something about that movie that just captivated me. Maybe it was the fact that the protagonist was also an inanimate object that was given life. Or it might have been something my subconscious noticed. Something creepy and unsettling about some scenes. As I grew older, I came to realize that all of these famous Disney movies were based on very old tales that in fact were much darker in tone. And I think this darker tone is something that Round 8 Studio capitalized on while making Lies of P. Lies of P was not only faithful to the darker tone of the original story of Pinocchio, but they took it one step further by mixing Pinocchio's lore with some serious Lovecraftian vibes. It's a story that as an adult I'm naturally more drawn to than the one found in Disney's movie. And I suspect a lot of Lies of P fans feel the same way, as it was recently revealed that Lies of P had officially sold 3 million copies. I think it has taken some time for the game to find its audience, but I think it's fair to say now that the Lies of P series has a bright future ahead of itself. And I think the only way they can keep this momentum is by replicating what made the first game so successful in the first place. Retelling fairy tales in a dark and twisted way, or in other words, create a dark fairy tale universe. Now, I don't think any Lies of P fans will disagree with this assessment, as Lies of P obviously ends with a very Marvel-like post-credit scene that hints at the future of the sequel. Everyone knows that the next fairy tale Round 8 Studio will tackle is The Wizard of Oz. But what if I tell you that there are already signs within Lies of P of other famous fairy tales that Round 8 Studio might be looking into adapting as well? It's been known for a while that there are a lot of references to other famous stories in Lies of P. For example, Victor the Champion seems to be a clear nod to the story of Victor Frankenstein, the mad scientist who created a monster from corpses. There's also the painting of Carlo, which is said to have been painted by the famous artist named D. Gray. This is a reference to Dorian Gray, a character who had a portrait of himself that would age in his place, similar to how Carlo's painting seems to be alive by growing a golden nose the more you lie in the game. And to keep the list of examples short, I'll mention one more that I think you'll really enjoy. Right outside the train where the puppet of Geppetto wakes up, we can see a travel board with other train trips that have been cancelled, and you can see that a lot of them were headed to a location named Dacia. This is another name for the region of Romania, the birthplace of Dracula and vampire legends. This reference is especially interesting to me because one of my favorite locations in Bloodborne is the Cainhurst Castle. So if this is Round 8 Studios' way of saying that we might see vampires in the future of Lies of P, all I want to say is that they have my full support. Now, while these references to other stories could be used to support the theory that Round 8 Studios is building a dark fairy tale universe, I'm afraid they aren't enough. We need something more concrete. And luckily, I think we have it. Of course, there's the obvious cutscene showing Dorothy herself, but I also think we've already met a character from another popular fairy tale. A character that I think belongs to the Little Mermaid universe. After defeating the Archbishop Andreas in the base game, you can use his ergo to purchase a weapon named the Trident of the Covenant. From the description of the weapon, we learn that this trident belonged to a warrior of the sea, who protected his people from the cursed relic. The relic in question here is the Arm of God, which has the power to mutate humans into Lovecraftian nightmares. From the base game, this is all we knew about this so-called warrior of the sea. It wasn't until Lies of P Overture was released that we finally got to learn more about this mysterious character. The warrior of the sea in question is the guardian of the ruins. We still don't know a great deal about him, but what we do know about him is that thousands of years before the events of Lies of P, his people were going to be cursed with immortality. That is, the immortality provided by the Arm of God, which many opposed for obvious reasons. One of this was the Warrior of the Sea, who vowed to slumber forever so long as his people were spared. We still don't know about the events that led to the Warrior of the Sea making this vow, but something that's very obvious to me and many other fans is the fact that some details regarding this character seem to hint that he's from the Little Mermaid universe. First we have his title, the Warrior of the Sea, and then it's his weapon. a trident. Because of this, many fans have theorized that this being came from an underwater civilization. And in fact, he might even be the king of the seas from the Little Mermaid story, who in this universe gave his life to protect his people. I think it's hard to argue with the first part of the theory. The fact that the character is named the Warrior of the Sea and his weapon is a trident is a clear reference that this being came from an underwater civilization. But I think saying he's the king of the seas goes a little too far. And in fact, it contradicts the lore of the game, as the trident's description clearly states that the warrior served an ancient king. If anything, he was a warrior who served the king of the seas. But the specifics of this character don't matter that much, because if I am right, Lies of P version of the Little Mermaid world will most likely look drastically different from what you saw in Disney's movie and even read about in the original book. One area where we can already see a difference is the location of this kingdom. In the original book, we could deduce that this kingdom was somewhere near the continent of Europe, but based on what I've seen in Lies of P, it seems like this underwater kingdom might be located somewhere near the waters of Korea. Korea in Lies of P goes by another name, the Country of the Morning. This is a clear nod to Korea's moniker, the Country of the Morning Calm. But why do I say that the underwater kingdom from the Little Mermaid story is located near Korea instead of Europe? Well, there are several clues. First is the weapon that the Spectre uses during the boss fight against the Guardian of the Ruins, the bow. This is important because a lot of times the weapon the Spectre brings into a boss fight is somehow connected to the boss's lore. For example, when you fight Romeo in the base game, the weapon the Spectre brings into the fight is the Puppet Ripper. And when you read the description of that weapon, it becomes very clear that it belonged to Arlecchino, the serial killer puppet. Now, back when Lies of P was released, the connection between Romeo and Arlecchino was a mystery, but after the DLC, we can see that there's in fact a huge connection between them, as we learn that Arlecchino kidnapped and tortured Romeo, which led to him becoming the king of puppets. So now when we see the Spectre bring this bow to the fight against the Guardian of the Ruins, we have to ask ourselves what the connection between them is. And in this case, it's not very hard to see, because in Lies of P Overture, we get to meet the only other character in the game who uses this bow. And that would be good old Alidoro, someone who's from the Country of the Morning. And if you spend any time reading his items descriptions or his notes, you will see that he has a lot of reverence for the ocean for some reason. Let me show you what I mean. He ends his notebook with, "I came from across the wide ocean, from across the wide ocean." He then repeats the same fact in the note left for his sister as if it were really important. "We came from across the wide ocean." And just in case you think that this is just him mentioning the fact that he arrived in Krat via a ship, let me show you one more item description, one that I think decisively connects him to the Guardian of the Ruins. This is the description of his other weapon, the two-dragon sword. "The sea remembers the vow of the warrior." This sure sounds similar to the item description of the Guardian of the Ruins trident. "The warrior of the sea vowed to protect the people from the cursed relic." Clearly, the Country of the Morning remembers some kind of event in their ancient history where a sea warrior made a vow to protect them, which is why they still show such reverence towards the ocean. But not even they know the full story behind the sea warrior or his kingdom, as this event I suspect took place thousands of years in the past. It's similar to us trying to figure out what happened during the Trojan War. We know that something happened, but we can't really trust the heavily mythologized versions we have received. Something like this knowledge gap is happening with the Lies of P universe as well. But one thing is very clear, the Country of the Morning and the Underwater Kingdom share some history. Because remember what the vow of the Sea Warrior consisted of. As long as he slept, his people would be safe from the curse of immortality. And in Lies of P Overture, we see evidence of this vow being broken. For one thing, we do see him awake, but if you also read the contents of a scroll written by someone from the Country of the Morning, you will realize something very interesting. The golden medicine enclosed in your recent communique was most welcome. I have confirmed its efficacy on patients suffering from mild symptoms of the stone disease, those whose lungs were not yet affected. Fortunately, it seems eradication of the disease on our shores is possible, as only some coastal residents show symptoms. The only people suffering from the petrification disease in the Country of the Morning are those who live near the ocean. This is because when the Warrior of the Sea was woken up, his vow was broken, which meant his kingdom was infected with immortality. And what do we see after exiting the ruins? We see aquatic life that has been turned into Lovecraftian monsters. Now, you might say that these fish were contaminated due to the Archon fleet running aground, which could have contained some of the alchemist's elixirs. But there's a problem with this interpretation. The Archon fleet belonged to the group of alchemists that didn't side with Simon Manus, the ones that opposed the effects of the sacred elixir, which means they wouldn't have any of that elixir on board. It's clear to me that waking up the warrior of the sea caused his underwater kingdom to be infected, which in turn began infecting the country of the morning. This is really interesting because it seems like the ocean in the Lies of P universe has now been compromised, which would make sense because the ocean is one of those things that's always associated with Lovecraftian horrors. So once again, don't expect this underwater kingdom to look like the one in Disney's Little Mermaid story. If we ever get to go there, it's going to be pure nightmare fuel. But does that mean that's the end for the underwater kingdom in the Lies of P universe? That's where I'm not so sure, because there's a small hint that possibly somewhat could help with the situation over there. The note that Alidoro leaves to his sister ends in a very interesting way. I know the people here call you Eugenie as their way, but that name will protect you. Please remember your real name. Your name is... That's it. We're told that the end of this note is damaged, leaving Eugenie's real name as a mystery for us to think about. But why? Why is Eugenie's real name so important? My guess is that there's more to Eugenie than meets the eye. Perhaps she's a descendant of the underwater kingdom who will one day come to its rescue, which would explain why Alidoro has such reverence for the ocean. I don't know, this last part is where I feel like I'm grasping at straws here. Clearly, Round 8 Studios planning something with her, but what that is, I'm not very sure. But what I'm sure of is that we've already been introduced to what I think is this universe version of the Little Mermaid's world. I was going to talk about how the sequel could relate to the story of Wizard of Oz, but this video, I think it's getting a little bit too long now. The main thing I wanted to prove in this video was the theory that Round 8 Studio seems to be making a dark fairy tale universe. So how about you let me know in the comments which fairy tale you would like to see in Lies of P after the Wizard of Oz. Also, let me know if you have a theory about Eugenie's role in the future of the series. Whatever your thoughts and theories are, make sure to leave them in the comments section below. As always, I want to give a big thanks to all of my YouTube and Patreon members for supporting the channel monthly. I would also like to thank all of you who like and share my videos. It may not seem like much, but trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching. And remember, go forth in the name of Olympus.